Now, in today's discussion starter video, and yes, that does mean I'll be doing a Let's Talk Some Star Wars video this weekend, where I delve into your comments from this video, I want to talk about what is still a rather touchy subject for some fans, that being the ending and removal from the canon of the old expanded universe, now referred to as Legends, shortly after Disney purchased Lucasfilm. And before I really get into it here, let me first say that the reason I rarely ever bring up or discuss the old expanded universe in my videos has nothing to do with disrespecting it or being happy that it got wiped away. Quite the contrary, really. There was a lot I loved and now miss about the old expanded universe, especially when compared to what's been going on in the sequel trilogy. Nevertheless, one thing I don't ever want to do with my videos is confuse people about what is and isn't considered canon in the Disney era of Star Wars. Not to mention there are probably thousands upon thousands of videos from other great Star Wars channels out there that have covered every and any aspect of the old expanded universe. And for me to do the same would just be beating the proverbial dead horse. Anyway, getting back to the topic of the death and wiping away of the EU. Don't hate me for saying this, but it didn't surprise me in the least when Disney announced they were doing it. I kid you not when I say I'd been bracing myself for it ever since the day I picked up Heir to the Empire, some 25 years ago now, and my journey into the EU began. And that's because, even then, I knew there was simply no way sequels to the original trilogy wouldn't get made somehow, someday, by somebody. I mean, the idea of sequel movies to the original trilogy, arguably the greatest film franchise ever created, was akin to a giant piñata full of money just sitting there. It was only a matter of time before someone took a stick, cracked it open, and raked in all the cash that fell out. And if George Lucas himself didn't do it, he'd eventually sell that stick to someone else who would. And that buyer just so happened to be Disney. And no surprise, the very first announcement from Disney, the day the sale was complete, was that they were making a sequel trilogy. And let's be real here, when making this new trilogy, Disney wasn't going to beholden themselves to decades of material, and sometimes material that, let's be honest, wasn't always the greatest or sometimes even contradicted itself, or that was contradicted by George Lucas himself, which happened a lot during the Clone Wars animated series, for example. And that's not to say there weren't a lot of exceptional stories, and that a hell of a trilogy couldn't have been made from the old expanded universe content. But I think a good debate could be had that trying to make the new sequel trilogy a close approximation of what the old expanded universe had been post Return of the Jedi may have backfired on them for a couple of different reasons. Because on one end of the fan spectrum, you'd have those hardcore EU fans who just wouldn't have been happy with their attempt to make something based off the EU, and they likely would have nitpicked everything about it. And on the other hand, you'd have those fans who don't know anything about the EU, and they'd be complaining that they're missing out on something, or like they have to catch up on countless books and comics to understand this new trilogy, even if that really wasn't the case. So like it or not, making something new that everyone could experience and learn together was probably their safest bet. Not to mention, especially after The Force Awakens, the mystery of what's going to happen next has been one of the most exciting aspects of this new trilogy. That being said, however, there are plenty of examples of film franchises that were based entirely off books, where we knew the eventual outcomes, of course, that were hugely successful. Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, and Hunger Games are just a few that come to mind. So perhaps there's nothing to say that Star Wars couldn't have done the same and been just as successful, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about it in the comments below. Next, I'd like to ask if the old expanded universe should, in some capacity, be resurrected and, in a sense, brought back into the real canon, or should I say the Disney canon. And the truly interesting part is that a doorway to this possibility has already been opened in the show Rebels, with the introduction of the world between worlds. What do I mean exactly? Well, if you didn't follow the show, and I recommend watching it, a different, you could say, realm or dimension was introduced that seems to allow time and space to be traversed within the Star Wars galaxy. In other words, it's brought the reality of time travel into Star Wars. Now, putting my feelings about that aside for a moment, because they are mixed when it comes to time travel in Star Wars. In the show, Ezra Bridger uses the realm, or this world between worlds, to save Ahsoka Tano during her battle with Darth Vader on Malachor. So in theory, this means other events could or could have been changed by others before or in the future. And in the show, Emperor Palpatine, or Darth Sidious if you prefer, is aware of the existence of this realm and even seeks entry, which means he likely got this knowledge from others who knew about the existence of this realm as well. My theory then, or way to make the old expanded universe part of the canon in some respect, is that something at some point in the past was changed via the world between worlds, thus altering the timeline from the old expanded universe to what it is now with the sequel trilogy and Disney's version of Star Wars. As for who may have done what to change all this, well, that's open for discussion, but I very much like the idea that Snoke is responsible for the change in the timeline. And the funny part is that Rian Johnson's utter lack of backstory for Snoke in The Last Jedi could almost be seen as a blessing in disguise, because he has very much left such a possibility wide open. Furthermore, the fact that during the throne room scene in The Last Jedi, Snoke implies there doesn't need to be a counterbalance in the Force for him, though does say there needs to be one for his apprentice Kylo Ren, implies that maybe Snoke is some type of anomaly, or something beyond the Force, which further opens the door that he does not belong in this timeline, or he is what destroyed the old expanded universe timeline, especially when you consider he is in no way, shape, or form a part of the expanded universe, which could imply his introduction is what destroyed it. And with Dave Filoni being the giant Star Wars fan that he clearly is, perhaps this is even why he put the world between worlds into Star Wars in the first place. Because to be honest, it's not a concept I overly love if the only thing it's ever going to be used for is explaining how Ahsoka survived and will now be around in the time period after the original trilogy. Sure, I love Ahsoka, but that's a hell of an addition to the canon just to keep one character around. And no, I'm not going to suggest the world between worlds could now be used to undo the events of the sequel trilogy, though technically I suppose they could. Nor am I suggesting it's something that should be used all the time, where you risk turning Star Wars into Marvel Comics, where time travel and alternate realities are so prevalent it makes it feel like nothing truly matters since it can always be changed and undone. What I am suggesting is that, since the world between worlds is already a part of the canon, it could be used to explain what happened to the old canon that many fans loved. And really, what's the harm in Lucasfilm giving some fan service or love to those fans who kept Star Wars alive and well during the dark periods between the movies? Why not at least try and give a nod of appreciation to those who bought all those books, comics, games, and so on over the years? Those fans that Disney told when they took over that the Star Wars that they knew and loved for decades was being wiped away to make way for what they now had in mind. And no, I don't think this idea could begin to heal all the wounds in the fan base, but perhaps it's a start, and for all I know, fellow fans of the old expanded universe might hate this idea, which is why I encourage you to share your thoughts in the comments below, because this weekend I will be delving into some of those comments in my weekly Let's Talk Some Star Wars video. And yes, I really am going to once again try to do them every week. Anyway, I'm personally a fan of this idea. Like I said, the world between worlds is now there in the canon whether we like it or not, so why not use it to explain what happened to the old expanded universe? That the end of it was more than just Disney saying farewell to it and waving their hand and magically having it disappear, but that there's actually a story within the Star Wars universe that explains what happened to it. And again, I'm not saying the world between worlds should be used often, rather it should be used very, very sparingly. The last thing I want is for Star Wars to turn into something like the X-Men franchise, where I'm not sure anyone knows what movies take place when and in what timeline anymore. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you think. Was the death of the expanded universe a necessary evil or a huge mistake on Disney's part? Would fans have accepted an approximation of it turned into the sequel trilogy? And lastly, would you like to see the world between worlds used to make the old expanded universe a part of the new canon in some capacity? Or do you think it should have nothing to do with Disney's Star Wars? Let me know in the comments below, and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.